And thanks, Stuart Home, for joining us this hour. Happy Friday. It is going to be a big newsy weekend, I have to let you know. We are expecting large-scale demonstrations, and a lot of them all over the country. There's going to be at least one demonstration in every state in the country tomorrow, and most states are going to have multiple demonstrations. We're expecting a particularly large one in Washington, D.C. All of those coordinated demonstrations, we think there will be more than 700 of them. Are all in opposition to the Trump administration's policy of separating kids from their parents. Now, there have been a whole bunch of developments on the story of the Trump administration separating kids from their parents just in today's news, including a big scoop on that subject from NBC News, and a whole bunch of officials who actually work at ICE, who are currently employed at Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, coming out with a surprising public statement on this issue. We're going to have more coverage on that over the course of this hour. I also need to tell you we've got Senator Cory Booker here tonight, live and in person. I'm very much looking forward to talking with him. Senator Booker has begun making a forceful case in the U.S. Senate that now that Supreme Court Justice Anthony Kennedy has announced his retirement from the court, according to Senator Booker, there are real conflict of interest issues that ought to constrain what happens next here in terms of that Supreme Court vacancy. No president has ever made an appointment to the U.S. Supreme Court when he and his campaign were the subject of an ongoing, serious FBI counterintelligence investigation. If the president himself ends up personally, criminally implicated in that ongoing investigation, which is not an insane prospect. I mean, the president's campaign manager is about to go on trial next month in federal court in Virginia on multiple serious felony charges. I mean, if that case or any of the other ongoing elements of this investigation end up personally, criminally implicating the president, that will instantly call into question a whole bunch of legal and constitutional issues that have never been formally settled by the Supreme Court. Can a sitting president be compelled to testify if you give him a grand jury subpoena? That is not settled as a matter of constitutional law. Can a sitting president be indicted? That is not settled as a matter of constitutional law. Can a sitting president pardon other people for the express purpose of derailing a case against himself or members of his own family? That is not the sort of thing that's ever definitively come up in federal court. If that possibility arose in relation to this scandal, the Supreme Court would likely have to settle that matter. Can a president pardon himself while he's continuing to serve as president? On that one, I mean, the president says on Twitter he can, but that doesn't count as binding precedent yet. If the president actually tried to do that, the Supreme Court would likely have to decide if that is kosher. If there ends up being a criminal case against the president, and if it is serious enough that he tries to invoke one of these never-before-used, heretofore, hypothetical, get-out-of-jail-free cards, well then, who's on the Supreme Court and how they view these unsettled matters will become a sort of life-and-death issue for this moment in American democracy. So, can the president appoint someone to fill a seat on the Supreme Court while this investigation is still open and ongoing? And just to show that this is not some esoteric concern, consider that one of the candidates the president says he's considering, actually the guy who's considered by most observers to be at the top of the shortlist, the guy who is considered by most people to be the most likely nominee, is a judge on the D.C. Circuit named Brett Kavanaugh. Judge Kavanaugh has written explicitly about whether or not a sitting president can be indicted. He has expressed in writing that the indictment of a sitting president would, quote, cripple the federal government, rendering it unable to function. And, you know, that's interesting from Judge Kavanaugh, right? As an abstract point of argument, it might be a fun thing to, chew over with him on the law review or whatever, but it's another thing entirely that he is being considered for the Supreme Court by a president whose campaign manager is on trial, whose deputy campaign manager and national security advisor and foreign policy advisor from the campaign are all awaiting sentencing and cooperating with prosecutors in this ongoing FBI counterintelligence investigation. I mean, no president has ever picked a Supreme Court nominee when looking down the barrel of this specific kind of personal potential criminal liability for himself. Senator Cory Booker says a Supreme Court nomination under these circumstances shouldn't happen, just as a simple matter of legal conflict of interest. Senator Booker will be here in just a moment to make his case on that point. But in terms of how long this is a live issue, how long this is all going to go on, the president told reporters today that he's going to start meeting with Supreme Court candidates this weekend. He's decamping to one of his golf courses for the weekend, and he's going to meet with Supreme Court nominees, potential Supreme Court nominees. He says he expects to make an announcement on who he's going to pick for the court within a week and a half, which is very fast. Why the rush? Lots of reasons, presumably, but to the extent that the special counsel's investigation and the way the president's own fate might end up in the hands of this Supreme Court nominee he is picking, well, we got a bunch more news today about the pace at which all these legal proceedings are unfolding. Trump National Security Advisor Mike Flynn pled guilty last year in December. Today, the prosecutors in the Flynn case and Flynn's defense lawyers said in a joint filing that, yet again, they are still not ready to wrap up his case. They're still not ready to end the legal proceedings involving Mike Flynn. And that's because when Flynn pled guilty, his guilty plea and his agreement to cooperate with prosecutors in their ongoing investigation, those two things were linked, right? The guilty plea and the cooperation deal. Mike Flynn did plead guilty, and so he is expecting some form of punishment from the court. But how much punishment he gets will depend almost entirely on how much he helps prosecutors in the meantime. So this filing today from Flynn's lawyers and prosecutors suggests that even now, 7 months after he pled guilty and started to cooperate, it suggests that Flynn is even now still helping prosecutors with their work. So they're asking for another 2 months extension before they start to wrap up Flynn's case. Quote, on May 3rd, 2018, the court ordered the parties to file a joint status report by no later than June 29th, 2018, which is today. Due to the status of the special counsel's investigation, the parties do not believe that this matter is ready to be scheduled for a sentencing hearing at this time. But actually, right below that, though, you can see in the filing, they do ask the court that at the end of this 60-day extension they're asking for, at the end of 60 days, they would like the court to move ahead with a pre-sentencing report for Mike Flynn. And that's the first baby step toward Mike Flynn finding out what his punishment ultimately will be. It is the first step toward ending the government's involvement with him here. We've seen how this goes with other defendants, right? A few weeks ago, we saw prosecutors ask the court for a pre-sentencing report on Trump foreign policy advisor George Papadopoulos. Since then, we've got a sentencing date for George Papadopoulos. He will be sentenced on September 7th. We don't yet have a sentencing date for Flynn. We know that it won't be in the next 60 days. But the very first signs of when Flynn's case might start to end just came into view today, with prosecutors and the defense asking for a pre-sentencing report on him 60 days from now in late August. So that's kind of the pace at which things are rolling with cooperating Mike Flynn. On the Michael Cohen side, the president's personal lawyer, that is not being handled in Virginia or D.C. like the other cases. The Michael Cohen situation is being handled in federal court in New York City. Within the last few days, the judge in the Michael Cohen case set a firm deadline of next week, by which time all evidentiary issues have to be wrapped up in terms of whether or not prosecutors are going to be able to look at the documents and materials that were seized from Cohen under a search warrant back in April. All the wrangling around those materials that were seized from Michael Cohen, it's been going on for weeks and months now, but the court says it'll be over by next week. Prosecutors in the Southern District of New York by next week should have their hands on all of the evidence they're going to get in terms of what was taken out of Michael Cohen's files and his office computers. So if Michael Cohen is going to be arrested and charged as a result of that evidence, you might expect that arrest and indictment would happen fairly soon after prosecutors finally nailed down all the evidence. And again, the nailing down of all the evidence will happen before the end of next week. If Michael Cohen is charged, he will then have to make a decision in pretty good time about whether or not he's going to fight the charges or whether he's going to plead guilty and agree to cooperate with prosecutors in their ongoing investigations. So that's all coming down the track very fast now when it comes to President Trump's personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. We can see what's happening with Flynn. We know what's happening with George Papadopoulos. We can pretty much see what's happening with Michael Cohen. And then there's President Trump's campaign chair, Paul Manafort. Now, we just got in the transcript, all marked up and highlighted because I'm a goober. We just got in the transcript just tonight of the court hearing in the Manafort case today. Paul Manafort is in jail in Virginia, waiting for his trial to formally start next month. Paul Manafort actually had the opportunity to leave jail and travel to court today, to be at today's hearing in person, but he asked permission from the judge to not attend, complaining about the long 2-hour trek each way between the jail and the courthouse, which is interesting. But for whatever reason, Paul Manafort didn't want to make the trip. He stayed in jail today while his lawyers fought on his behalf. But there's two things that you should know about what happened today at this hearing. One is that it was sort of a landmark moment. For the first time today at this Paul Manafort hearing, we got a live witness testifying for the prosecution about the special counsel's case against Manafort. We haven't had anybody on the stand before answering questions and getting cross-examined in this case, but today we got that, and it was quite revealing. The other thing you should know about this hearing today, and I say this as a non-lawyer who reads things in a petty way because I'm a catty small person, is that this transcript, and maybe it doesn't read this way to lawyers, but reading this transcript for me today, I feel like one of the important things that I've learned about this case is that the judge in this case, this is the judge in the Eastern District of Virginia, Judge Ellis, this judge is a little bit of an unusual cat. And I know there's an appropriate way to say that while maintaining appropriate, deference and respect for the bench here. I do not mean to cast aspersions. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with him. I just mean that reading transcripts of his remarks in court, it's a little weird. There are very surprising moments. And that has to affect how the prosecution and the defense approaches things in his courtroom. It has to, because it strikes me as weird. Let me give you an example. So this is a moment in the transcript. This is a prosecutor from the special counsel's office, a prosecutor named Uzo Asanye, and he's questioning this live witness. First time we've had a live witness on the stand in the special counsel's investigation, right? He's questioning this live witness who is an FBI agent, the agent who obtained a search warrant in the Paul Manafort case. And so this is from the transcript. Mr. Asanye, the prosecutor, says, question, did Mr. Trusco tell you if Mr. Manafort had previously used that residence to conduct business? FBI agent. He did. Prosecutor. And what did he say? FBI agent. He said that Mr. Manafort had used that residence to conduct business. Question from the prosecutor. After Mr. Trusco told you that he had moved business records into that storage unit, did you ask whether he knew if the records were still in the facility now? And then the judge interjects, and the judge says to the prosecutor, quote, you're leading. Why don't you say, what, if anything, did you ask him? The prosecutor says, well, Judge, I simply didn't because the federal rules don't apply in this type of hearing, meaning I'm allowed to ask leading questions. But I can ask it as a more open question if you prefer. And the judge says, yes, I would prefer you did that. Go. And then at that point in the transcript, I won't read that exact part of it, but at that point, the judge just himself starts asking all of his own questions to the witness, the way he thinks the questions should be asked, like demonstrating to the lawyers in the court how he would prefer it to be done, more to his taste. And so then the prosecutor, in fact, starts asking questions more like that in a more open-ended way. And then just a few minutes later in the transcript, they are taking a break because Paul Manafort's defense counsel has to look at something that's been introduced into evidence that the defense lawyer hadn't seen before. So he asked for a second to look at that, and then this happens. The defense counsel for Paul Manafort says, may I ask for a moment, Your Honor? The judge says, yes, you may. Paul Manafort's defense counsel says, thank you. And then the judge says, while he's doing that, Mr. Asanye, while you're correct that the rules of evidence don't apply, strictly speaking, as you'll know from looking at the law, they often are referred to and imposed because they help ensure the reliability of the evidence that is presented. And that includes whether leading questions should be asked. Because it's well known that individuals with a gift, as you have, a gift of engaging in verbal atomic footwork, you get a rhythm going, and who knows what the witness will agree to. So I prefer to have direct, open questions asked. The prosecutor, Mr. Asanye, says, fair enough, Your Honor. And then the judge says, you'd be surprised what answers you get. I worked for one lawyer at a law firm when I first arrived. He never asked leading questions, and he had a very successful litigation life and experience. He's in the great litigation land in the sky now. But he did well while he was here. And then the judge says, next question. Okay, everybody pick up from here. Before we all end up in the great litigation land in the sky. I didn't even edit that. That was exactly how it went. Anyway, next question. I knew a lawyer once who didn't ask leading questions. He's dead now. The judge also at one point just seems to get hungry. On page 67 of the transcript, the court, quote, "No, just tell me in a sentence. It's lunchtime." There's also this one testy moment. The judge says to the prosecutors, "Do you have anything further you want to say about that?" And one of the prosecutors, Scott Meisler, rises actually for the first time in the hearing at that point, and he says, "Good morning, Your Honor. It was the defense motion." And then the judge interrupts and says, "It's not morning, it's afternoon. And that's the point that I want you to have." And then the prosecutor says, "Time flies when you're having fun." And then the judge says, "Yeah, and even when you're not." So the prosecutors and the defense lawyers clearly have to tread a little bit lightly with the testy, hungry, snippy judge here, which I think that is how he likes things in his courtroom. But check out this discussion about leaks. The big picture here is that Paul Manafort's defense team sort of seems to be running out of steam a little bit. All of their efforts to limit the case, to get the charges thrown out, to get the charges dismissed, they've all failed thus far. And they've tried a lot of different things. What they seem to be sort of boiling down to now is a claim that Paul Manafort should be let off the hook because of the amount of information about his case that has been reported in the press. His lawyers are now essentially asserting what a lot of people in political scandals over the years have tried to argue, which is that the intense public interest in his case and all the public reporting that's being done around his case has resulted essentially in the defendant being tried by leak. That people are they have their minds so made up about him because of all the leaks to the press and all the reporting about it that he can't possibly get a fair trial, so the court should basically let him go. Paul Manafort's defense counsel today actually tried a little shy Hail Mary, where his defense lawyer actually said the case against Manafort should be dismissed because there have been leaks to the press about the case. Watch the judge shut this down. Kevin Downing, defense counsel for Paul Manafort. "May I be heard, Your Honor, briefly?" The judge, "Yes, the magic word is briefly." Mr. Downing, you talked a bit earlier about voir dire, which is questioning potential jurors. You were going to inquire about what people know about the case, the manner in which they've heard about it, and whether or not they can be fair and impartial. We don't have to take too much time, but we'd like to do some supplemental briefing with you, Your Honor, about the nature of the leaks that occurred here. I mean, we have highest level government officials that have said to the press that Mr. Manafort, and then the judge intervenes, "Well, have you filed? Let's assume for a moment that you're right. What is the remedy that you would seek?" And then Downing says, "Well, the question becomes, how can he have a fair trial when the press and media have been so saturated with false statements about the evidence?" The judge says, "All right, so what's the remedy, assuming you're right?" Downing, "Well, given the pattern of conduct, one remedy is certainly dismissal." The judge, "No, putting that one aside." Mr. Downing, "I'd like to stick with that one briefly." The judge, "No, go on." And actually, in that moment, the judge is saying no to dismissing the case on the basis of media leaks. But then Mr. Downing says, "Your Honor, what I'm trying to deal with is I think you've kind of glossed over this issue in terms of you talking to somebody and asking them some questions in voir dire. I think we can do some supplemental briefing to just show this court how satiated the populace." The judge, "Will you listen to what I'm saying to you? What remedy would you have asked for if you're right that it has been satiated, as you put it?" Mr. Downing, "It would have to be a change of venue?" The judge, finally. Mr. Downing, "I was brief." The judge, "Have you made a motion?" Mr. Downing, "We haven't made a motion on that." The judge, "It is a remedy, but I have to determine whether the remedy is warranted. You better marshal all of your evidence on that before we determine whether you go to Roanoke or Richmond or someplace to try to this case." Mr. Downing, "We'd asked leave of court to file a supplemental briefing on that issue." The judge, "Well, do it. Do it right now. Do it quickly. I expect to see it by the close of business Friday, a week from Friday." Mr. Downing, "Thank you, Your Honor." The judge, "That was obvious the first time I saw the motion." And then he goes on to complain about how, honestly, it is time for lunch. You do not envy people having to argue in this courtroom, right? But this change of venue thing appears to be the latest gambit from the Manafort defense. Now they want to try to move Paul Manafort's trial to another part of Virginia to, I guess, escape the media coverage that emanates from the D.C. metro area about his case. Presumably they think they'd get a more conservative environment. I don't know. Manafort's defense team is going to try that now, though. And meanwhile, they're starting to put up live witnesses to defend the propriety of the evidence that the special counsel's office has seized from Paul Manafort and that they are using in the case against him. And last point here, there was a really, interesting moment from that live witness on the stand today. This is an FBI agent on the stand, and the FBI agent explained today in court that the FBI apparently only learned that Paul Manafort kept some of his business records in a storage locker, which ended up getting searched and ended up being really important. Apparently, the FBI only learned about the storage locker when AP reporters contacted the FBI to ask them for comment on a story the AP was pursuing about Manafort's finances. All right, question. This is the prosecutor. Could you please state your name for the record? Answer, Jeff Pfeiffer. Are you currently employed? Yes. Where do you work? The FBI. What's your title? Special agent. How long have you been a special agent with the FBI? Since 2002. Let me direct your attention to the spring of 2017. Were you assigned to a particular FBI squad at the time? Yes. Which one? International Corruption Squad. And are you currently assigned to that squad? Yes. During your tenure at International Corruption Squad, were you involved in an investigation relating to Paul Manafort? Yes. And in May 2017, did you obtain a search warrant related to a storage unit in Alexandria, Virginia? I did. What location is cited in the warrant? 370 Holland Lane, Unit 3013, Alexandria, Virginia. And what is that exactly? That's the storage unit in question. Now, you testified earlier that you searched the storage unit. How did you come to understand that Mr. Manafort used a storage unit? Answer, I don't recall exactly. It was either through my investigative efforts or through a meeting that occurred with reporters of the Associated Press. Question, a meeting with reporters, did that occur on April 11th, 2017? Answer, yes, it did. Where did that meeting take place? In the Bond building of the Department of Justice. And who was present? Members of the FBI, Justice Department, and the Associated Press. What did you understand the purpose of that meeting to be? Answer, to receive information from the reporters. To receive information from the reporters. Not to give the reporters information, but to get information from the reporters. Question, can you explain to the court generally what happened? Answer, the reporters offered information in regards to an investigation they had been conducting on Mr. Manafort. Question, and how did government representatives respond? Generally, no comment as far as questions involving any sort of investigation. Question, based on the meeting, did it appear as though the reporters had conducted a substantial investigation with respect to Mr. Manafort? Answer, they had. During that meeting, did one of the reporters mention a storage unit in Alexandria, Virginia associated with Mr. Manafort? Answer, he did. Question, did you subsequently issue a grand jury subpoena to a facility named Public Storage? Answer, I did. That's how they found it. Why would the AP reporters be giving information to the FBI? That's the way the FBI agent described it. The Associated Press later clarified exactly what happened there. They put out a statement today explaining how they think the public should see this meeting. This is from an AP spokeswoman. Quote, Associated Press journalists met with representatives from the Department of Justice in an effort to get information on stories they were reporting, as reporters do, said AP spokeswoman Lauren Easton. Quote, during the course of the meeting, they asked Department of Justice representatives about a storage locker belonging to Paul Manafort without sharing its name or location. So that's how it happens. And, I can't help but think that this is sometimes just the way these things go. Reporters go to the government, they go to get confirmation or comment, whatever information they can get. The government mostly no comments, but by accident, the government actually learns something that becomes important for their investigation later when they get asked something by these reporters that they didn't know about before they heard the question. And now we know, based on this hearing today, that that's how the FBI figured out that Paul Manafort had a storage locker, which they subsequently raided, which we now know turned up evidence, among other things, that Manafort had a previously unknown $10 million outstanding loan from a Russian oligarch named Oleg Deripaska that was paid into a Paul Manafort-controlled shell company that he used for, among other things, paying more than $3.5 million in cash to buy an apartment in Trump Tower. Remember how when he wrote to Trump about becoming his campaign manager, part of his pitch was, hey, I live in Trump Tower. The president's personal jeopardy in this investigation is still an open question. The Papadopoulos proceedings and Flynn and Cohen and Gates and all the rest of them, it's all part of that. But the president's campaign manager is going on trial now. And proceedings in his case are moving fast. And at least thus far, they are proceeding in front of a very unpredictable, very testy judge who gets hungry right around noon and who has started to get testimony from the first live witnesses for the prosecution. Will the president be picking a new Supreme Court justice in this context? Hold that thought.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.